So I'm Holly Morse-Coons. I'm superintendent of Dripping Springs ISD.
I'm Stephanie Reinhold, board president.
And we're excited you're joining us this morning. So we started off with just a meet and greet and spent some time getting to know everybody and having some quick conversations. We have a short presentation on board governance and leadership. And then for anyone who's interested, we're actually going to do a tour of this building and just show you what our Center for Learning and Leadership is and kind of walk you through the halls if y'all are interested. So we'll go ahead and get started. Since this is about our school board, we thought we'd start off with an introduction of our school board members. So we'll just go around the room.
Oh, hi. Olivia. Trisha Quintero.
I'm Shanda DeLeon.
Joan Cousins. Mary Jane Hedrick.
I'm Rob McClellan in the back.
Hi.
And then we also have our senior staff, not all of them who are here today. We have Elaine Cogburn, who's our Deputy Superintendent for Finance and Operations. In the back, we have Karen Kidd, who's our Assistant Superintendent for Learning and Innovation. Jennifer Edwards, who's our Executive Director of Communications. And then we also have our two chiefs, Linda Hall, who's over Human Resource Services, and then Gina Mitchke, who manages our financial services. So we want to tell you a little bit about our Taxpayer Tuesday series. This series was started by the district 2 years ago, and really our goal was to give our stakeholders an opportunity to learn more about our school district. And it kind of has evolved over the years. It started off the first year as all financial information and has grown to really match and meet the needs of what our community has asked for. So every year when we finish our series, we ask our community members who attended to give us feedback about the series and to tell us what sessions they would like to see. And so we've been adding on these last 2 years with some new topics based on what people are wanting to learn more about in our district. And so this year, these are our topics. So we're starting off with board governance. Then we actually have navigating school finances. That'll be our next one in October. And that tour will be Dripping Springs Elementary. In November, we'll be touring Dripping Springs High School and talking about some of our academic programs, highlighting some of our CTE programming, and really talking about instruction. That was a request that we had for a new session. In January, we'll be at Sycamore Springs Elementary, and we'll be talking about recapture and school finances and kind of how revenue works within the public school system. In February, we'll be back in this building, and our school board actually has an advocacy committee. And so that committee is going to be presenting their advocacy agenda and talking about how our school board works with the legislature to advocate for public schools. And that was also a request that we had. And then in April, we'll be at Rooster Springs Elementary talking about school bonds. So those are our topics for this year. So sometimes it's helpful to talk a little bit about our district just to give an overview of Dripping Springs ISD as we're talking about what our school board does, what our administration does. Sometimes helpful to kind of orient you to Dripping Springs ISD. So we are a fast growth district. In 2020, we were 7,200 students. This year we are projected to be about 8,900 students. So over the last 5 years, we've grown over 1,500 students. We have 8 schools in our district. Always surprising to me that sometimes people who live in our community may not necessarily know how many schools are in our total district. So we have 1 high school, we have 2 middle schools, and then 5 elementary schools, and that makes up our total of 8 campuses. And then as a school district, we're pretty large as far as land mass goes. We're 198 square miles. So there's quite a bit of travel in our district if you're going from one end to the other. That's helpful to know. Sometimes our families live in neighborhoods like Belterra or High Point. When we have bad weather days, they look out and they say, gee, everything looks fine. But if you're way out McGregor or Martin Road, it looks like a completely different environment when we have bad weather. And so knowing that our district really does make up a lot of different types of community within our community, I think is sometimes helpful. So we thought we'd talk about the governance structure in Texas.
So we have our state board of education, which are elected positions in the state of Texas. That's 15 members, and they write rules to implement laws. Then it kind of comes down to our governor, commissioner, board of trustees, superintendent. So governor and legislator are elected. They consider and pass laws affecting education. So that's a huge part of our advocacy position, is to influence legislature. Commissioner of Education, that's appointed by the governor. They provide leadership to the School Board of Education and to TEA. Our school board of trustees, these are elected local positions. We have 7 members in our board of trustees. We set policies for the district. We implement laws that come down from the state. Superintendent is appointed by the board, so we hire our superintendent to provide leadership for daily operations. And then Texas Education Agency is kind of the implementation and enforcement of the rules of education in Texas.
And so sometimes people aren't aware that there's a lot of different authority that gives information to us as a public entity and helps us to understand the different rules. So rules are created by the State Board of Education, that SBOE up there. There's also rules for educator certification. That comes from a different entity aspect. We have rules around our finances that come from the comptroller's office. We have our county appraisal districts, which are separate taxing entities, which set up the rules for our community. TxDOT sets the rules for the law, or the laws for the streets and lights. Sometimes people don't know that, and they call us and want to know why the traffic light is out, and we don't actually have control over that. But it's amazing things that people think it's out in front of your school district, so you must have something to do with that. And so we get, different agencies that people sometimes aren't sure who to reach out to, and they reach out to the school district. There is a U.S. Department of Education, which also sets rules for public schools across the country, not just in the state of Texas. And so sometimes you have competing laws between those. There is FEMA, which when we have natural disasters, sets rules for how we handle those. And so sometimes when there are major things that are happening, whether that's, weather events, those rules and how we're handling that as a school district may be set by those other agencies. And then, of course, we work with the City of Dripping Springs. We have the Sheriff's Department and DPS who also set rules, and the Fire Department who may set how we're building different buildings or different things that we can or can't do within our buildings. And so all of these agencies are outside agencies who we work with on a regular basis and who have some authority over some aspect of our school district operation.
Yeah, and the one thing I'll add kind of to the previous slide is that, so outside of the legislator, some of these may not be like hard and fast laws, but they do affect programming that is a law, or it affects some other safety protocol that is a law, or it affects a funding arm. So even if some of these agencies are not kind of a law set in stone, it usually is related to or affected by a law. And so that's why there's a lot of things that we actually don't have control over. There's a lot of things that we do have control over, but understanding that jurisdiction, and quite frankly, it's a little complicated in our particular area because I don't know if we get into it later, but we're in an ETJ, so city and county to district is confusing for a lot of people, and we happen to be the people that set a tax rate, but those taxes do not all come to the school district. So that's also very confusing, I think, to understand. So there's just a lot. The big bottom line, there's a lot that kind of keeps us functioning as a school district. And still other things that we have quite a bit of influence over. So the governance of the local boards, our independent school district is governed by the Board of Trustees of the body corporate. So we are an independent school district. So we are an independent governing board, again, with a lot of limitations on what we can and can't do sometimes, but we are still an independent governing body, and we ensure that the superintendent implements, monitors plans, procedures, programs, systems to achieve appropriate, clearly defined, and the goals, essentially the goals and values that we set as a board for our district. I already mentioned, so we're 7 members. In our school district, we elect them at large, which just means we are all on the same ballot. Top votes wins the election. Other districts are what you call places, where you're only running for one place. We are at large, which is kind of what that means, plurality. Elections are held on the May uniform election date, and our terms are 3-year terms.
And so there are actually requirements for being a board candidate. Interestingly, you have to be a United States citizen, and you have to be 18 years old. So hopefully you're through the system before you're running for school board, although there have been cases where people are not. And so at 18, you are able to get your name on that ballot if you are interested. In Texas, you have to have been a resident for 12 months, and then a resident of the district for 6 months. And so you don't have to have been here longer. But sometimes that's a question that we get is how long do I have to have lived in the district? And that's 6 months. You need to be a registered voter in the school district, so make sure that you have taken care of that paperwork. Not mentally incapacitated, which is defined in law, and then not have been convicted of a felony, and those are questions on the application when someone applies.
So these are our board commitments, and this is not all inclusive, but general commitments. We have 2 monthly board meetings. We usually have an agenda review or some kind of workshop, and our regular general meeting where we take action on different action items. We may have other special meetings. We have monthly campus visits. We have things like this, like Taxpayer Tuesday, that we're encouraged to attend. We have an annual full day of training. We have quarterly conferences, which provides us other additional training because we do have continuing education requirements from the state. Graduation is something that we traditionally attend. Other school district events as appropriate. We all have a subcommittee. We're all liaisons of different committees within the district level and even outside of the district in different community organizations. But it's all super fun and amazing, but it is quite a bit of time and commitment.
And I think that's one of the things that oftentimes our community, and just communities in general, don't know, is you're looking at 7 volunteers who are giving up an inordinate amount of time to serve the students in our community and to serve the families in our community. And so it's a really big time commitment. And I think when people get on the board and start to look at all that is involved and the commitments that we're making to each other as a team to work together and to be at these things for our students and families, there's a lot of time. I'm paid to do this job, but there's a lot of time that they are spending as unpaid volunteers to be out and to be at campuses and taking out of their workday. I mean, everyone's taking time out of their workday right now in the middle of the day to be here. And so I think it's important that our community knows that and really appreciates the time and commitment that our board makes to really be at events and to really kind of keep their finger on the pulse. And attending all of these things helps with that. So school board responsibilities?
Yeah, so I mean, it really comes down to pretty basic things when you look at exactly our responsibilities, and it turns into, 100 action items throughout a year. But we hire the superintendent, so that is also, she is our one and sole employee. So when people come to us with frustrations about other staff, we can only really direct our superintendent. And hopefully if our values and goals for her have been met, then that trickles down to the tone and the culture that we set as a board for the district as a whole. But she's the one and only employee that we really have any control over. We adopt board policy, which is obviously a very critical part of our job. This should be part of our vision statement, part of our campus improvement plans, and policy both from what's coming down from the state, so for example, after the Uvalde incident, they mandated a law that we needed armed officers at every campus. That was something that it was more, we didn't have a lot of say over how that got implemented. The state basically tells us. So we have tons of policies like that. We also may choose to have individual policies within our district that maybe other districts also adopt or don't adopt. We adopt the budget. That's obviously a huge part of how we spend publicly funded dollars through your taxes and how that gets spent in our district. And we canvass elections.
So superintendent responsibilities are really more the operational part of the job. It's the day-to-day. So when we're looking at setting expectations for teachers, academic performance in the classroom, that all really flows through me, working with Dr. Kidd, who's over our Learning and Innovation department, and making sure that we're providing the support for teachers, providing the professional development for teachers, providing the curriculum for teachers, and then supporting them in implementing that. Our office is the office that coordinates with other agencies, so if there's a fire issue or something that happened in the school that doesn't follow, let's say, what the fire chief has set out, then that's our job to go in and work and make sure that we make those changes on that campus. So that's managing those operations. Organizing the central administration, so determining who does what role and hiring staff, that's really my job. We prepare the budget, present it to the board, they give us feedback on that, and then they're the ones who vote and implement that, but we're the people who put that together. I make the employment recommendations. Board hires anyone in our organization who's principal or director or higher, so that kind of senior staff level, that all of those individuals come before the school board for them to meet before we actually put in a final hiring approval. We recommend the policies and develop the regulations for how things will actually operate. Once the board says this is the way that we expect that to run kind of at that higher level, then we're living in the day-to-day details of that. And then we develop the campus improvement plan, and then it's my job to collaborate with the board, make sure that I understand what each of the 7 board members as individuals have as their priorities and what's important to them, and then that I take that and synthesize that collectively and then communicate that out to our district. And so this is kind of a responsibilities comparison. So on the school board side, they govern, oversee, and guide. On the district side, I'm managing, implementing, and operating. And so they're the what we do, and then I have the responsibility for the how we do what the board expects.
So what is a board policy? That's the question. A clear statement by the board requiring and/or authorizing action. Sounds pretty simple. So this is used to guide and determine present and future decisions. What is kind of supposed to be done is we provide direction. Again, we are kind of the overseer, the governing body, so we provide direction. We show that the district is fair, reasonable, even-handed, not arbitrary, and capricious. We also kind of provide a legal basis for things, essentially all to help with daily operations.
And so here's an example of a board policy, and Stephanie actually touched on this one earlier. So we talked earlier about how things happen at that beginning point at that governmental level. And so you have the governor and then the State Board of Education, TEA, who kind of set those initial rules. That in our policy, if you look online, you see this legal framework. So this is CKE, which is one of our current board policies. This is a policy on safety programs, specifically security personnel. So within that legal framework, a law came down that said an armed security officer was required for schools. So that was the law that was set forth that we had to follow, and the policy actually will cite that law under education code there. So that's where you could go and look up what's all of the details that the legislature set. This is kind of the summary of that. And then the local policy is then what our school board set. So our board members had this requirement. They asked us what are options for how to implement that. We discussed that, and then they came up with 2 solutions that they wanted us as a district to implement. One was school resource officers at our campuses where we could, as a partnership with Hayes County. And so the board approved that MOU, which is our memorandum of understanding and agreement with the county for them to provide school resource officers. The second piece of that was school marshals. So where the county was unable to fully staff our campuses, then the board asked that we implement a school marshal program. They set the policy for that to go forth. And then through our director of safety, Serena Cumberland, we actually put the steps in place for what training they get, and then she supervises them. So it kind of helps you to see what happens at the state level, what happens at the local policy level, and then what's being implemented at the district level by our staff as kind of those 3 layers of the law through policy. Does that make sense?
Yeah, one of my favorite questions I get from community members is actually, who's responsible for this? Because that tells me they're not just reacting, but obviously they have some frustrations around something, whether it's a campus, construction, an individual, personnel, something they're frustrated about. And so I like that question because then I can kind of clearly guide them who is responsible for this. Sometimes I immediately know the answer and I can kind of direct them to the right person. Sometimes it's a little trickier. For example, the roads. We constantly get complaints around the roads, but we have 0 control over roads and infrastructure. But I can say, hey, that road is the city. Let's go advocate for the city, to the city. That road is the county. Let's go advocate to the county. That road is the state. So things like that. Or if it's, an individual campus, sometimes it is within our purview. It's a policy that maybe we want to take another look at. Maybe it's something that came down from the state legislator like this. Perfect example, I got a complaint around all the fencing that's happening on campuses recently. I get it, not popular. It's kind of an eyesore depending on what campus you're at. I personally don't really love it either. It was part of a lot of safety mandates that came out after Uvalde shooting, and the governor kind of put forth a whole safety protocol for every school district in Texas. One of them was armed officers, one was fencing, updated cameras, things like that in your district. And so it's helpful to have those conversations because I think unknowingly a lot of community members just immediately assume this is school board and everything is school board, and it's not. I mean, we have quite a bit of influence, but there's quite a bit totally outside of anything that we have control over.
Well, and I think the nice thing about doing sessions like this is you get to know your school board members, and that's an important part of being a community, is for our community to have people who are just like them, who are parents in our schools, that they can reach out to and have a conversation and get a better understanding, and at least then know who to navigate to within the organization, so that if you are having an issue, they know, oh, that's the director of, community services, let me get you over to Lucy Hanson. But it helps to have that connection across those lines for everybody to be able to help people get the answers that they need and to understand that at a little deeper level. So thank you for joining us today. These are our next sessions. So in October, like I said, we'll be at Dripping Springs Elementary, and we're really going to be running through kind of the nuts and bolts of school finance and all of the details around that. And we hope you will join us for that. Thank you for participating in the meet and greet. It was nice to get to spend some time talking with you all. And we will be around for a little bit as we are going to take the tour of this building and then also have our board here for that. Yes, you can put questions as well.